Iamide had always been a simple man with quiet dreams, the kind of dreams that didn't shine loudly but lived deeply inside him. He worked as a humble civil servant in Ibadan, earning just enough to manage his life, yet every day he imagined himself rising one day to become someone respected in government. His heart was steady, patient, and full of determination. And in that heart lived Biola, the woman he believed he would build a future with. She was stunning, confident, and used to comfort. She loved fine dining, designer bags, and luxurious outings, but Iamide didn't mind. He believed love could close every gap between them. At first, Biola tried to accept the difference in their lifestyles. She told herself that Iamide's kindness made up for everything money couldn't buy. But as her friends showed off their partners, men with big cars, expensive gifts, and endless cash, something inside her began to shift. Slowly, her smiles turned into sighs, and her compliments turned into complaints. She started comparing everything Iamide did to what her friends' boyfriends could afford. When he took her out to simple restaurants, she frowned. When he bought her thoughtful but modest gifts, she pushed them aside. Her love became measured by how much he could spend, not how much he cared. Every week, she found a new reason to complain. She told him he needed to upgrade. She said his salary wasn't enough for the kind of life she wanted. She even joked with her friends that Iamide was trying his best, but his best still can't reach my level. The words stung, but Iamide kept quiet, thinking she was only frustrated and would eventually understand his journey. He never raised his voice, never fought back. He only held on to the hope that love could survive differences in class and lifestyle. But Biola didn't see it the same way. She began to look at him not as a partner, but as someone holding her back from the life she believed she deserved. And with each passing day, her distance grew, her tone sharpened, and her patience faded, until love no longer felt like enough for her. The night everything changed started like any other date night Iamide planned. Simple, calm, and within his budget. He chose a small restaurant he knew she used to enjoy, hoping it would ease the tension that had been growing between them. But the moment they sat down, Biola's mood was already sharp. She complained about the menu, the lighting, even the chairs. Iamide tried to stay patient, hoping a gentle conversation would calm her, but Biola had come with a storm inside her. When the bill arrived, she glanced at it and sighed loudly, shaking her head. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," she muttered. Iamide asked softly what she meant, but that question broke the thin thread holding her temper. She pushed her chair back, looked at him with frustration boiling in her eyes, and snapped so loudly the whole restaurant froze. "Iamide, you're not on my level. I need someone who can take me places, not hold me down." Her voice echoed across the room. People stopped eating and turned. A waiter paused mid-step. A couple at the next table exchanged awkward looks. Iamide felt heat rush to his face, his chest tightening as if someone had punched him. He wanted to defend himself, to tell her he was trying, that he loved her, that he was working on growing, but the words refused to come. His love for her was bigger than his pride. So he stayed silent, swallowing the shame as tears burned behind his eyes. Biola, however, was not done. She stood up, grabbed her bag, and said, "I can't do this anymore." She didn't even wait for him to respond. She walked out, leaving whispers and stares behind her. When they got outside, Iamide tried one last time to speak, but Biola lifted her hand and cut him off. She pulled off the engagement ring as if it was something dirty and dropped it into his palm without looking at him. "Give it to someone on your level," she said coldly. Then she got into a car waiting for her and drove away, leaving Iamide standing alone under the streetlights, heartbroken, humiliated, and holding the ring that once symbolized a future she no longer wanted. For days after the breakup, Iamide moved like a shadow in his own house. He turned off his phone, closed his curtains, and avoided anyone who tried to reach him. The silence around him felt heavy, and every time he closed his eyes, he heard Biola's voice shouting that he wasn't on her level. Her words replayed in his head like a wound that refused to close. He barely ate, barely slept, and barely spoke. The pain sat in his chest like a weight he couldn't lift. Kunal, his closest friend since childhood, finally forced his way into Iamide's room. He took one look at him and shook his head. "So this is what you've turned into?" he asked gently. Iamide didn't answer. He just stared at the floor, ashamed and exhausted. Kunal sat beside him and said the words that would change everything. "If she says you're not on her level, then rise above every level she knows. Let your success answer her. The statement hit Ayamide deeper than anything else. It wasn't about proving Biola wrong. It was about proving to himself that he could become more than she ever saw in him. For the first time in days, he lifted his head. Something inside him shifted. Pain turned into determination. Heartbreak into clarity. He wiped his face, took a deep breath, and decided he would not stay broken. The very next morning, he powered on his laptop and started searching for opportunities. He applied to public service training programs he once thought were too competitive. He enrolled in leadership courses, determined to sharpen his communication and decision-making skills. He registered for civil service exams that required months of intense studying. He even reached out to mentors he admired online, asking for guidance and resources. Every day became a routine of learning, working, and improving. He cut off distractions, reduced outings, and focused entirely on growth. People thought he was trying to forget Biola, but he wasn't running from the pain. He was using it. The breakup that almost destroyed him became the reason. He pushed himself harder than ever before. Deep down, he knew his life was about to change because he refused to let heartbreak define who he would become. Ayamide's life slowly shifted into a routine that most people around him couldn't understand. During the day, he worked whatever small jobs he could find, helping at a printing shop, assisting a survey team, doing office errands for a local firm. Anything that would allow him to save money and still have time to study. When others went home to relax, he sat with his books, watching lectures online, reading policy documents, and practicing speeches in front of his mirror. His nights stretched long, often ending only when the first call to prayer echoed through the early morning air. People noticed his new discipline, but not everyone admired it. Some relatives mocked him openly. They laughed at the idea of him joining politics or serving in high government positions. Politics is for big men with big pockets, one uncle said. Not for small boys like you. A neighbor joked that Ayamide was wasting his time reading books that won't buy food. Even friends who once supported him began to drift away, saying he was taking life too seriously. But Ayamide didn't respond. He just kept working quietly, refusing to let anyone's doubt shake his focus. He pushed himself to learn skills he once thought were beyond him. He practiced communication until he could speak confidently in any situation. He joined free online leadership trainings and community workshops. He volunteered at local events so he could understand how public service worked from the ground up. He read about government policies, studied reforms in other countries, and listened to interviews of great leaders. Slowly, his mind expanded, his voice strengthened, and his confidence grew. As months passed, people began to notice something different about him. He became the person everyone trusted to organize community meetings, settle small disputes, or help with paperwork. His calmness stood out. His ability to listen made people respect him. Whenever he spoke, even elders paused to hear his thoughts. Local professionals started inviting him to small gatherings, saying they appreciated his intelligence and dedication. Ayamide didn't announce his progress to anyone. He didn't post it online or boast about it. He just worked, studied, and improved day after day. And in that silent grind, something powerful happened. He transformed without anyone realizing how far he was already rising. Ayamide's breakthrough came on a quiet morning when he received an email he almost thought was a mistake. It was from a federal ministry in Abuja, informing him that he had been selected for a prestigious government fellowship, a program thousands applied for, but only a handful ever got into. He reread the message over and over, his hands shaking. After months of long nights and silent sacrifices, something had finally opened for him. He packed his small bag and traveled to Abuja with a grateful heart, determined to give the program everything he had. From the first week of the fellowship, Ayamide stood out, not because he talked the most, but because he observed, asked thoughtful questions, and offered practical solutions. While others tried to impress the senior officials with big grammar and complicated presentations, Ayamide spoke plainly, focusing on real problems and realistic solutions. His humility caught their attention. His discipline earned their respect. His fresh ideas made them pause and listen. Slowly, he became the fellow everyone turned to when a task needed clarity or calm execution. During one policy workshop, a top official pulled him aside and said, "Young man, you think like someone who wants to serve, not someone who wants power." Nigeria needs minds like yours." Those words fueled him even more. By the end of the program, Ayamide had built strong relationships with directors, advisors, and reform-minded leaders, people who would later play major roles in his journey. His performance was so exceptional that the organizers nominated him for an international leadership exchange program. Only a few candidates were chosen nationwide, and Ayamide was among them. For the first time in his life, he traveled abroad, visiting institutions, learning advanced governance systems, and meeting leaders from different countries. He absorbed every lesson and returned home wiser, confident, and more equipped than ever. Word about him began to spread quietly in government circles. Journalists heard about the young fellow from Ibadan who impressed everyone with his simplicity and brilliance. A small Abuja newspaper published an article calling him the young reformer with a humble background. It wasn't loud fame, but it was the beginning of a reputation that would soon lift him into rooms he once only dreamed of entering. When Ayamide returned to Nigeria after the international program, he didn't come back as the same quiet young man who once doubted himself. He returned with clearer vision, stronger confidence, and a deeper understanding of public service. Almost immediately, he was invited to join a special reform committee created to improve public services across the country. The committee was filled with older experts and long-serving officials, but Ayamide didn't let that intimidate him. Instead, he focused on the work, analyzing systems, proposing simple but effective solutions, and bringing a fresh perspective that many had overlooked. In every meeting, he listened carefully before speaking, and when he finally talked, people paid attention. He didn't use complicated words or political games. He went straight to the point with honesty and logic. His efficiency stood out in a system where many preferred shortcuts. His integrity surprised colleagues who were used to seeing young officials drawn to easy favors and quick benefits. But Ayamide refused to compromise. If something wasn't right, he said it. If something needed to be done, he did it. His commitment made him a trusted name within the committee. As months passed, his work began to shine beyond the committee room. Reports credited him for projects that cut waiting times, improved public service delivery, and made government processes more transparent. Senior officials noticed his impact and recommended him for leadership roles. Soon after, Ayamide was appointed as the youngest director in his ministry, a position usually reserved for people twice his age. The announcement shocked many, but those who had worked with him knew he earned it through hard work, not connections. His new role opened doors he never imagined. Governors started calling him for advice on youth programs, community development, and public reforms. Politicians invited him to panels, conferences, and consultations because they valued his clear thinking. Media outlets described him as the calm voice of modern governance. People admired him not just for his rise, but for the humility he maintained through it all. Ayamide didn't chase popularity. He didn't brag about his success. He simply kept working, meeting communities, solving problems, and serving with sincerity. And quietly, steadily, he became a respected national figure, a young leader people looked up to, long before he realized just how far destiny was preparing to take him. Ayamide never imagined himself stepping into politics, but his work in public service had already made him a familiar name across communities. Everywhere he went, people greeted him warmly and thanked him for the changes they could actually feel in their daily lives. Community leaders began visiting his office, praising his efforts and telling him he had the kind of integrity the country needed in higher positions. Youth groups organized events just to hear him speak, saying his journey gave them hope. Slowly, a message started spreading. Ayamide should run for a major political office, maybe commissioner, maybe even deputy governor. At first he laughed it off, saying he was too young, too inexperienced, too ordinary. But the calls didn't stop. One evening, leaders from different local groups gathered at his home. They told him that leadership wasn't about age but about heart and competence. They reminded him of how far he had come and how much people trusted him. Their words hit him deeply. He went home that night thinking about everything he had gone through. The pain, the growth, the work, the sacrifices. He realized he wasn't the same man who once doubted whether he was on anyone's level. Slowly, he accepted that maybe this was the next chapter destiny had been shaping for him. With a mixture of fear and courage, he finally agreed to run. Once his decision became public, something unexpected happened. His campaign didn't start with money or grand promises. It started with people. Youth groups volunteered to design posters. Market women donated food for his team. Teachers spoke about him during school assemblies. His story, the humble civil servant who rose through honesty and hard work, spread like fire. People trusted him because they had seen what he could do, not what he could say. His campaign swelled into a movement. Election day came with tension, but the results shocked even his opponents. Against all odds, Iamide won. It wasn't just a victory, it was a statement that character still mattered. As preparations for his swearing-in ceremony began, the entire state buzzed with excitement. Iamide stood quietly in his office, realizing that the journey which began with heartbreak had led him to a place even he never imagined. The morning of Iamide's swearing-in ceremony felt like a dream come to life. The entire venue buzzed with excitement. Cameras were set up everywhere. Reporters rushed around preparing their live broadcasts, and dignitaries stepped out of shiny official cars. Governors, senators, traditional rulers, youth leaders, civil servants. People from every corner of society gathered to witness the rise of the young man whose story had inspired thousands. The crowd stretched far beyond the entrance, with citizens waving flags and holding signs that read, "We believe in you, Iamide." As Iamide stepped onto the red carpet walkway, dressed in his ceremonial attire, applause erupted. Flashing lights filled the air, and people shouted his name with pride. He remained calm, greeting people politely as he moved, but then something unexpected caught his eye. In the middle of the crowd, standing slightly behind a group of women, he saw a familiar face, Biola. For a moment, the noise around him faded. She looked nothing like the confident woman who once boasted about levels and luxury. Her makeup was light, her clothes simple, and her posture uncertain. Life had dealt her harsh blows. The wealthy boyfriend she left Iamide for had abandoned her when she lost her job at a private firm. Bills piled up, friends disappeared, and the lifestyle she once flaunted slipped out of reach. She had come to the ceremony out of curiosity, maybe even regret, but she didn't expect to be this close to him. When their eyes met, Biola froze. Her lips parted slightly, and her eyes widened in disbelief. She stared at him as if trying to convince herself that this dignified, celebrated leader was the same man she once embarrassed in a crowded restaurant. The same man she said was not on her level. The same man she believed would never amount to anything. Iamide looked at her with no anger, no bitterness, just calm acceptance of how life had unfolded. Biola's heart twisted painfully. She had lost him not because he changed, but because she never believed in who he could become. Watching him walk confidently toward the stage, surrounded by people who admired him, she felt the weight of every choice she made. And in that moment, she realized she would always remember this day. Not as his victory, but as the moment her own pride shattered. As Iamide moved toward the podium, the atmosphere shifted into something almost cinematic. Cameramen pushed forward, microphones stretched out, and flashes fired non-stop, lighting up his path like a runway. His official attire, crisp and dignified, made him look every inch the leader the people had chosen. The crowd quieted as he climbed the steps, each one echoing the journey he had taken, one that began in pain but led him to purpose. In the audience, Biola could barely breathe. She leaned closer to her friend, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Is that Iamide?" Her eyes stayed glued to him, unable to look away, unable to believe what she was seeing. This wasn't the man she once dismissed for not being on her level. This was someone transformed, someone she no longer recognized, someone the whole nation now respected. Her friend didn't soften the truth. She simply nodded and said, "Yes, the man who's now on every level you dreamed of." The words hit Biola hard. She felt them sink deep into her chest like a heavy stone. Her throat tightened, and her hands trembled slightly. She remembered the night she humiliated him, the ring she threw, the pride she carried. And now here he was, standing in front of governors, dignitaries, and cameras, not just on her level, but far beyond it. As Iamide reached the center of the stage, he paused briefly before taking his oath. The world watched him. Reporters leaned forward. Leaders nodded with approval. And somewhere in the middle of the crowd, Biola's eyes filled with regret so sharp it almost hurt to blink. She watched him raise his hand, confident and steady, the very picture of the man she once thought could never rise. For a brief second, Iamide's gaze drifted across the crowd and landed on her. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pride. It was calm, quiet closure, the kind that says, "I'm no longer who you left behind." He gave a small, polite nod, then turned back to the stage, ready to begin the life he had built through discipline, perseverance, and pain turned into strength. Viola stood frozen, realizing she wasn't witnessing just a ceremony. She was witnessing the result of her own choices. And in that moment, poetic justice unfolded right before her eyes. The hall fell into a deep, respectful silence as Iamide stepped up to the podium for the first time as an elected leader. His hands rested lightly on the microphone, not shaking, not uncertain, steady, confident, and calm. He looked over the sea of faces before him. Governors seated in the front row, journalists ready with their cameras, community members who had believed in him from the beginning, and young people who saw him as proof that dreams could survive even the hardest storms. The lights above him glowed softly, almost as if highlighting the moment destiny had been preparing for years. Iamide took a slow breath before speaking, and his voice carried through the hall with a gentle strength. He didn't start with politics or promises. He started with people. "Never look down on anyone," he said, his words clear and sincere. "People rise, people grow, and sometimes destiny takes them farther than you ever imagined." His message wasn't just for the crowd. It was a reminder shaped by his own pain, his own journey, his own transformation. The hall erupted into applause. Some people stood, clapping with pride. Youth shouted his name. Older leaders nodded in admiration. His words hit everyone deeply, because they came from a place of truth, not performance. Iamide smiled slightly, humbled but proud, knowing this moment was bigger than the victory itself. It was the beginning of what he hoped would be a meaningful service to his people. At the back of the hall, unnoticed by most, Viola stood with her hands clasped tightly together. Tears gathered in her eyes, blurring her view of the stage. She watched him shine, watched people celebrate him, watched everything she once thought he could never be. She didn't move, didn't clap, didn't breathe fully. She simply stood there, silently facing the reality of what she had lost. Not just a man, but a future she never had the patience or faith to see. Iamide didn't look back again, but his message echoed loudly in her heart. The hall lights dimmed slightly as the event drew to a close, and on the large screens behind him, his final quote appeared like a stamp on the entire journey. Levels change, character remains. And with that, the story of his rise closed in dignity, strength, and quiet triumph.